not sure that humans negate them. There's about two kinds of people. There are people who are insulted when you compare them with animals. And yes, they try to negate, they feel there's something else than an animal. But there's an entire different category of people which I often run into because I speak often for zoo audiences and people like that who love to be compared with animals. And so if you say you're jealous and your dog is jealous, they think that kind of comparison is perfectly fine and they see the similarities. And so I think there's a certain group of people who object to the similarities. You find them more in academia than outside actually. And it has something to do with indoctrination, in my opinion. They get indoctrinated over time by philosophy and by psychology and by all sorts of fields that we humans are something else. Now the biologist, I'm a biologist by training, the biologist doesn't believe that, of course, because we have lungs and hearts and brains and DNA. We have everything that a rat has also. And so the biologist doesn't think that way, but outside of biology some people do. Primates have all these things, have power relationships, have of course sexual relationships, otherwise they wouldn't be here. And of course they have complex societies in which all these things happen. Actually justice is something we do experiments on. So we do, for example, experiments where you have two monkeys who do the same task side by side. And if you give them the same reward, they're perfectly fine with it. But if you give one of them a much better reward, let's say one of them gets cucumber, the other ones get grapes, and grapes are so much better, then the one who gets cucumber starts refusing the task. Now that's very interesting because normally that monkey would work fine for cucumber, but not when the partner is getting something better. And so we've detected in primates that they're sensitive to reward distribution, just as humans are very sensitive to it. There's a lot of economists who study this in humans, and so they do something like that is called the ultimatum game, in which they give humans different rewards, and humans object to it just like the monkeys do. Power is very important for male chimpanzees, for example. The whole day they're busy with their power relationships. They're forming coalitions to defeat others. There's many primates for which dominance relationships are very important, and much of the time the dominance order is stable. So let's say you have a female dominance order among monkeys which doesn't change in 10 years. And so during those 10 years you think, well, they're actually not very interested in it. But as soon as then one, let's say a young female grows up and she becomes stronger and she starts to challenge the alpha female, then you see how much it matters to them that they're willing to risk their life basically to improve their position. I think in humans power relationships are extremely important. And what happens in humans is, and I find that unfortunate, is that there's a sort of taboo on power. There was a Dutch psychologist who interviewed managers of big industries and asked them, how interested are you in power? And all the answers he got was like, I'm interested in responsibility, I have leadership qualities, I want to convey that to the community, and so on. He got a lot of blah blah from these people which had nothing to do with power, but he found in his studies that they were extremely interested in power relationships. And I think in humans there's a taboo on it. So for example, Machiavelli is a bad word, even though Machiavelli was very open about power relationships. In chimpanzees, if I watch my chimpanzees, I'm not dealing with those taboos at all. I can just talk about this male is alpha male, this male is beta male. He tries to get the position of the other, and I can just explain that, and people are perfectly happy with that. But as soon as you do that to humans, if you say, for example, presidential candidates are interested in power, there's a lot of nervous glances that are going around because actually these candidates don't want to be depicted as being interested in power. Well, I'm very interested in the origin of morality, and there is a school within philosophy who believes that, maybe you could call it the Kantian school, which believes that we developed morality on a sort of rational basis. We decided one day to have this rule or that rule because this one was more just than that one and so on. And so it's a rational process. There's a different school within philosophy, which is the Humean school, of David Hume, who believes that morality grew out of the moral sentiments, like empathy and sympathy and retribution and reciprocity. We have a lot of these sentiments, as Hume called them, which drove us towards a moral system. And I believe very strongly in the Humean school, in believing that actually it came out of our psychology, and our psychology is a primate psychology. And so in primates you can see many of these same tendencies. You can see empathy and sympathy, you see reciprocity, you see retribution, you see rules that are enforced and they beat up someone who doesn't follow the rules. And so you see many of these elements that are present in human morality I'm not sure that they're moral beings in that they reason about these things or that they build a consensus about these things. I'm not sure that they're doing that, but they have many of this psychology that we have incorporated in human morality. Primates, all the mammals can be quite altruistic, I think. And I think sometimes it is a simple system that doesn't even come with altruistic feelings. Let's say a ground squirrel sees a predator and gives an alarm call. That's basically altruistic towards the rest because the rest is now warned about this predator. But I'm not sure that the ground squirrel does this with any altruistic motivations. But you can also see cases where there is an altruistic motivation, where, for example, chimpanzees, let's say one chimpanzee gets beaten up in a fight, another chimpanzee goes over and consoles and grooms or kisses or whatever. They try to calm down this individual. Then you get more sort of empathic reactions that we humans consider altruistic. And they're very common, I think, in the primates. At the moment, there's a big debate about whether primates care about the welfare of others. And there used to be the claim that they don't, and that only humans do. But there's now 5 studies at the moment. There's 5 studies that have shown that they actually do. And so the debate is moving on to the next step. But there's always these debates where people claim only humans do this, and then we have to work very hard, and then we defeat it, and then they make another claim. And that's usually how the field progresses. Well, there is an interesting issue, which I think is our objection to the Wall Street bonuses, which has been going on for half a year now. And that relates very much to the sensitivity that my primates have to unequal rewards for the same task. It's like these people at Wall Street haven't been doing a very good job, but they're getting salaries of $100 million or something like that. And we're objecting to that. So there is this sensitivity to reward distribution related to effort that we find in the primates also. I think other than that, the human economy is so complex that I barely understand it, and most economists I understand don't understand it. So the parallel with monkeys is a bit hard to draw, I think. There are scientists who write about the economics of primate relationships, and so, for example, one of the issues that they bring up is what is called a biological market. And what they mean is that everything is regulated by supply and demand. Let's say I'm a male and I want to challenge the alpha male, and there's another male who's the only potential partner for me who would, well, that male will then have a lot of leverage because he knows that I cannot handle this on my own, and so this gives him leverage. And people have been studying this, and so, for example, one study that they did is that they found that if baboons have babies, other females are very interested in the babies of the mothers, and they want to touch them and handle them and manipulate them and all of this. And they groom the mother in order to get access to the baby. What they found, very interestingly, is really supply and demand, is that the more babies there are in a baboon group, the less grooming you need to do to get your hands on a baby. And if there's only one baby in a baboon group, you need to do a lot of grooming to the female in order to get your hands on it. And so they basically say the price of baby access goes up when there's less babies. And so that kind of studies are being done, and they relate to economy, obviously. What we have found is that primates in the field, they have different habits from site to site. So let's say chimpanzees in Africa, you can visit them on one place, you can visit them another place. In one place they do nut cracking with stones. The other guys, they have nuts and stones available, but they're not doing anything with them. And so we call that cultural differences, that someone has made an invention in this place and not in the other place, and it has been transmitted among all the chimps here, but not on the chimps here. And these cultural traditions are now being studied also in captivity, where, for example, we do that at the Yerkes Primate Center, where we introduce habits to a group, we teach them something, and then we see how it spreads in a group. And so you get this social learning from each other. And there's an enormous amount of research that goes all the way down to fish, that people do in culture studies in fish nowadays, rats, birds, whales, elephants, all sorts of animals. So that's one field that is very hot at the moment. And then the other field is what we call behavioral economics. And that's the sort of things we do in my lab with the capuchin monkeys, where you have them do a task. For example, if you see how friendly they want to be to a partner, let's say, do they want to work for food that also gives food to their partner? And they're willing to do that. Then we can start switching between two individuals and see if you get reciprocity. If you do this for me, will I do it for you? And actually that's what we're seeing, is that it increases their tendency to be pro-social if they can sort of get benefits out of it. And so we do these little capitalist type studies with monkeys to see how much they're willing to work for a certain task. how resistant are they to inequities in the system, and which inequities matter to them. It turns out that primates are most sensitive to inequities with individuals that they don't know very well. That has also been found in humans, is that you're more sensitive to income disparity with your neighbor or with a colleague than with your wife or with a brother. And so in humans also, the closer individuals are, the more resilient they are, the more less resistance they have for inequities. So we're testing that in monkeys, and it's very interesting research, actually. I think what has happened over the last 25 years is that the resistance to, let's say, human-animal continuity has dropped dramatically. So 25 years ago, when we would say that human behavior is partly biologically determined and that genes play a role in human behavior, people would be falling all over you and would call you a Nazi, as happened to E.O. Wilson, for example. He was compared to fascists basically because he was saying that biology is important to human behavior. Now we can hardly imagine that anymore, because that resistance has completely evaporated, and that's partly because of genetic studies. There's a gene for everything now: schizophrenia, for the God gene, the language gene. People talk about genes very easily. And so that resistance to biology and human behavior has dropped. And as a result, people are also more open to animal studies. If you say animals do this, animals do that, and it's comparable with human behavior, that resistance has also been reduced. That doesn't mean that humans are in no way different from animals, other animals. But it means that the gap has sort of been closing. And it's a very interesting closing, because on the one hand, it has increased the status of animals. Oh, animals are much more complex than we thought. But it also a bit reduced the status of humans, because humans are actually more animal-like than they used to think. And so I think that gap is closing to the point that at some point psychology, and that's a bit happening already, psychology will become part of biology, basically. If you look at neuroscience, for example, neuroscience is a field that bridges the two, and that's sort of happening. And that's something that was predicted by E.O. Wilson 30 years ago.